Evening, everyone. Lovely to see you again. So let's sit together for a bit. Keep your head, neck, and trunk aligned. Feel the space your body occupies inside your skin. And let that inner space become like the night sky. As you enter the Akasha Guha, the cave of space, the most sacred temple. Feel the flow and the touch of the breath in your nostrils. The warmth as you exhale, coolness as you inhale. And for a moment, appreciate the glory of this sensation of being alive. And just continue to watch the movement of the wave of breath and prana, cleansing you with the exhaling breath, energizing you with the inhaling breath. Gradually becoming longer and smoother and deeper. And just allow these natural changes to continue. And let your breath gradually settle, becoming long and subtle. Dirgha and Sukshma. And notice how the muscles in your body begin to relax as soon as you start to observe. And just allow that process to continue. Using your awareness to feel each part of your body, starting from the top of your head and your forehead. And then your eyes and eyebrows. Your cheeks and the corners of your mouth. Relax the corners of your jaw. Muscles in your neck. And from your throat center, feel out along your shoulders toward your fingertips, through your upper arms, and through your forearms. Your hands, your fingers, and fingertips. Relax your fingertips and feel back into your fingers. Let go of your fingers and feel back into your hands. Release your hands as if they could just float away. Feel back into your forearms. Relax your forearms and feel back into your upper arms and your shoulders. Relax your upper arms and shoulders. And from your throat center, feel down into your chest. Relax your upper chest and upper back. The muscles in your rib cage. Feel into the center of your chest. Exhaling and inhaling from that space, free and deep. Relax the center of your chest. Feel down into your abdomen. Relax your navel center. Feel down into your hip joints. Your gluteal muscles. Relax your thighs. Your calves and lower legs. Relax your feet and your toes. Feel the whole body breathe. The whole body at peace. Still. Feel that flow of breath and prana from head to toe. Whole body breathing. Washing you with a current of stillness. and peace. Feel that flow between your navel and your nostrils. Breath and mind flowing together. And just listen. Let the mantra arise in your mind in whatever way it comes. Gently drawing your mind more and more still. Oh, presence of the mantra. Now, feel that flow along the bridge of your nose, between the eyebrow center and nasagra, where the nose bridge meets the upper lip. Mantra sound resonating in that space. Feel that flow through the left hand channel in the left nostril. Ida. And feel that flow through the right hand channel in the right nostril, Pingala. Now, leave left and right and go deeper between these two into the Sushumna stream. Breath may become very subtle. Let it go. Just follow the presence of the mantra in whatever form, as syllables, as a feeling, as a pulsation. Just follow that presence and let it take you wherever you need to go, perhaps to a chakra or along the spine, or simply into a silent chamber. Now let the mantra thought arise again, rippling your calm mind and let it merge in the flow of breath and prana from head to toe, so that your whole mind becomes full of that sound. Keeping this awareness, let your mind turn gently outwards, healing your body from head to toe, and let your palms come before your face, and your eyes gently open, observing the outward motion of your mind. And let your heart fill your palms with blossoms of gratitude for the well-being of all creatures. And thanks to the Guru, connecting us heart to heart and coming to us at every moment with every breath. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Mm. May have a little challenge with reading tonight. I had my eyes dilated earlier today, and I don't think they're quite completely back yet. Last week, we got very close to the end of chapter 2, and we were just getting into Shantideva's reflections on impermanence. Before I launch into all of that, any comments or questions before we get going?
Which verse were we up to?
I am going to start from 32
Okay.
tonight. We went through that whole business last week about the nature of confession. I thought that was just a really interesting discussion. I hope I wasn't just responding to my own words. But just to recap some of that, I really liked Trungpa's characterization of what would ordinarily be translated as sin as neurotic crimes. These things that we do out of attachment to pleasure or aversion to pain that keep us bound into samsara. And I think that phrase, as I said last week, takes some of the moralistic blame out of the notion of sin, sin being just our turning back into the habit of pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain, and thereby creating further karma, further sanskaras for ourselves, rather than living a life of joyful, mindful awareness, in other words, practicing tapas, where we begin to build a sense of durable, unshakable sense of joy in our personality that ripens the qualities of compassion, openness, acceptance, love, and the Brahma Viharas as they're described in both the Yoga Sutras and the Buddhist texts, where they're known as the four immeasurables. So we came to, after that discussion about learning to see things honestly when we look ourselves in the mirror, and also the help that we give each other in providing an interpersonal mirror in which to see those things, to look at them honestly, to accept that they're there, and to work to change those aspects of our behavior, to repent, to turn back towards the path of joy. Um, and So we tried very carefully in the process of talking about how that worked, that process of confession in the Buddhist tradition, to sort of distinguish it from the kind of blame with which people raised in particularly Protestant Christian traditions tend to view the term sin and our own sinfulness. We are not originally sinful. I still believe that that's a theological error on Augustine's part. Um, he was just trying to describe this habit we have of turning back towards pleasure and pain, but that's not who we are at the core of who we are. At the core of who we are Atman, we are Purusha, we are Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta Swabhava. Our true nature is um, purified, enlightened, liberated at all times. And being able to become aware of that is what we're about in doing this. So this brought us to verse 32 in these reflections on impermanence. 32 says, "Before my evil has been cleansed away, it may be that my death will come to me. And so that, come what may, I might be freed, I pray you quickly, grant me your protection. The wanton lord of death we can't predict, and life's tasks done or still to do we cannot stay. And whether ill or well, we cannot trust our lives, our fleeting momentary lives, and we must pass away, forsaking all. But I, devoid of understanding, have, for sake of friend and foe alike, provoked and brought about so many evils, so many neurotic crimes, we'll say. My enemies at length will cease to be. My friends and I myself will cease to be. And all is likewise destined for destruction." So this is just a reminder of the doctrine of impermanence and also of the fearfulness that we often have as we approach death or injury or pain or any of the things that we associate with that end of things. And as long as we keep slipping back into that world of pleasure and of attraction to pleasure and avoidance of pain, the fear will be there. Even in terms of the good things of life, we fear losing them, as Patanjali tells us in chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras. So in verse 32, Shantideva says, and this is a second paragraph on page 41, "Grant me your protection." And in other Buddhist liturgies, we read, "Grant your blessings." But from whom are we asking help and blessings? How can we understand this non-dualistically? Trungpa Rinpoche explained that it's not so much the notion of someone protecting or blessing us, it's more an attitude of let it be so. May I be protected and blessed by the inspiration of wisdom mind. Let this be so. And I think we can kind of put this in human terms. What came to mind as I was reading about this and the fear of death is Psalm 23 of the Psalms of David, that famous psalm that gets read at just about every funeral. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I'm reading from the King James Version, which is admittedly not a perfectly good translation from the Hebrew, but There it is. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, is this God saving a person walking in the shadow of death? No, there's nothing in here about saving or protecting. There is, however, companionship. Divine presence walks with us. And in the moment when our life is threatened, Swami Rama used to say, your mantra comes forward to guide you through that experience, to walk with you in the valley of the shadow. My friend Kai Stenland had an incredible experience of this when he was a teenager. He was in college down in Iowa, and he was in a rock band. And they used to drive around with all their stuff in a big old hearse, which was, you know, kitschy and wonderful. So they're on their way to a gig, barreling down I-80 in western Iowa on that flat highway, very, very fast. The person, uh, uh, Kai was not driving the car. This is another band member driving the car. She loses control at very high speed, and the car rolls 8 times into a cornfield. Everyone is thrown out of the car. The driver is killed. And Kai wakes up in the middle of a cornfield, and all of a sudden he says to himself, why am I in a cornfield? I don't get it. He didn't even know where he was or what had happened. And the reason, he said later, is that as the crash began to occur, his mantra came along, and was so loud and so powerful that it blotted out any recollection of what was happening. And didn't have a post-traumatic memory of that crash because the mantra protected his mind. There are lots of stories of that nature. Some of them are even weirder. Tig and I used to tell one where he was given a lecture in New York, and he was on his way back to Honesdale. Now, some months before, like 6 months, 8 months before, he had been in India, and he'd been doing a special mantra practice that Baba gave him. He completed the practice, and at the time he completed the practice in India, he had a dream about driving in the car, and they're driving along the road, and all of a sudden they go up a ramp to get off the road, and there's a car coming down the ramp the wrong way. And just as they're about to crash, he wakes up. So he's 6 months later, he's been given this lecture in New York. So they're driving on the way back to the Institute at Honesdale, and they've come to the exit to get off the freeway to go to the Institute. And they start going up the ramp, and sure enough, here, just before this started to happen, Tig and I realized the people in the car with him were the same people in his dream. So he began to be alert. And all of a sudden, the car turns down the ramp the wrong way, comes at them. And at the moment the crash is going to occur, all of a sudden, all of them are on the hillside above this whole scene, watching it happen from outside the car. How did that happen? You know, it's a pretty wild story. And of course, you're not obliged to believe that that happened, but there are plenty of those kinds of stories of the presence of the guru coming forward at a moment of great peril like that to walk with you in the valley of the shadow. So that psalm is really about divine companionship and about the presence of divinity in the core of your mind that we don't usually see or feel until we are made aware that it's there. And this comes in many different ways. For a lot of people, it's their experience of beginning to hear the still small voice, the voice of the guru in their heart, that motherly voice that doesn't yell at you to tell you what to do, but might make a suggestion in a quiet voice that you might miss if you're not paying attention. So it's a good reason to pay attention. Children goes on. Verse 34 discusses a provocative topic. Long after our friends and foes have gone, we still carry the imprints of our positive and negative reactions, our sanskaras. Our habitual patterns remain in place long after the objects of our attachment and aversion cease. The problem is not our friends and foes per se. The problem is the way we relate to them or to any external circumstance. What habits are we strengthening when we get enmeshed in our attachments and aversions? How will we experience the world a month, a year, or 5 years from now? Will we be even angrier, more grasping, and fearful? Or will some shift have occurred? This depends entirely on the tendencies we reinforce today. What sanskaras are you making as you go forward? Because you are, as we know, the architect of your life and you decide your destiny, in the words of our Baba. Those habits are there. They're actually there for good biological reasons. They're there to protect us from situations where we have to respond quickly without thinking. So we need to have those habits. It's not that they're a bad thing, even though, from the perspective of people involved in spiritual practice, we often tend to look at them that way. But they do have a positive function in terms of our self-protection. In 36, Shantideva goes on, all that I possess and use is like a fleeting vision of a dream. It fades into the realms of memory, and fading will be seen no more. And even in the brief course of this present life, so many friends and foes have passed away, because of whom the evils I have done still lie unbearable before me. The thought came never to my mind that I too am a brief and passing thing. And so, through hatred, lust, and ignorance, I've been the cause of many neurotic crimes. Never halting night or day, my life is slipping by, and nothing has passed. Nothing that has passed can be regained, and what but death could be my destiny? We hope that our life isn't just slipping by. We hope that it's passing by with some degree of awareness, and that in those moments of awareness when we can penetrate our ignorance, that we're able to do something more loving, more compassionate, more friendly in the world. So it isn't just a matter of life slipping away. Yes, our lives are impermanent. But we also know the good news there is that every way that you have somehow fallen short and failed in your life, you will have a chance to deal with it again. It will come around another time. You have always got a second chance. It's kind of crummy that you don't get to control when that second chance comes around, but that's the price we pay for living in bodies the way that we do. She goes on to say, in interpreting these last couple of verses, Verse 36 evokes the insubstantial quality of our lives. It is Shantideva's first reference to the illusory, dreamlike nature of reality. Whenever we feel ourselves getting hooked, just recalling these words can be a powerful support. They can help us cut through the emotional entanglements and tune into a bigger view. These verses address the essential groundlessness of our experience. If we are trying to ignore the truth of death, we might find ourselves in a kind of panic, Shantideva describes. Any degree of attention to our experience will easily convince us that life is slipping by. In my own experience, getting older is a good motivator for not wasting precious human life. So Shantideva goes on, there I'll be, prostrate upon my bed, and all around the ones I know and love, but I alone shall be the one to feel the cutting of the thread of life. And when the vanguard of the deadly king has gripped me, what help to me will be my friends or kin? For only goodness gained in life will help me. This, alas, is what I shrugged away. Children says, we die alone. Friends, family, or material abundance can do nothing to change this simple fact. When my children were teenagers, I took them to meet the 16th Karmapa. As they weren't Buddhists, I asked His Holiness to say something that didn't require any understanding of the Dharma. Without hesitation, he told them, you're going to die. And when you do, you will take nothing with you but your state of mind. Powerful thing to say, especially to an adolescent. In verse 41, Shantideva reiterates this and then talks graphically about the horrors of death. O protectors, so little heeding, had hardly guessed at horror such as this, and all for this brief, transient existence, have gathered so much neurotic crime to myself. The day they take him to the scaffold, where his body will be torn and butchered, a man is changed, transfigured by his fear. His mouth is dry, his eyes start from his brow. If so it is, then how will be my misery? When stricken down beside myself with fear, I see the fiend, the messenger of death, who turns on me his fell and dreadful gaze. Who can save me? Who can now protect me from this horror, from this frightful dread? And then I'll search the four directions, seeking help with panic-stricken eyes. Nowhere help or refuge will be found, and sunk beneath the weight of sorrow, naked, helpless, unprotected, what, when this befalls me, shall I do? So he's really laying out the solitary nature of our passing. And for one who's not prepared, who still clings to attractions and aversions, it is indeed a fearful moment where it appears that all is about to be lost. Chudrin goes on to say a little further on here, the transition between pages 44 and 45. The latter style doesn't work very well in the West without trust in our basic goodness. Its message is easily misunderstood. The point is to understand that everything we do has consequences, and they won't always be comfortable. Each day we're either strengthening or weakening negative patterns. But as Trungpa Rinpoche once said, karma is not punishment. It's the consequences that we're temporarily stuck with. We can undo it by following the path. And of course, this is the whole business of the first half of chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutras, where Patanjali is talking about the thinning down of the kleshas, klesha tanukarana, the gradual thinning down of the kleshas by creating bright sanskaras to balance off the darker and more painful ones, to make your mind more and more sattvic as you go along. If you do that, then you come to the end of your life in a different way. You come to the end of your life, she says further on here, if you are able to relax into groundlessness. What a lovely description of the practices of relaxation, of yoga nidra, of meditation. Relaxation into groundlessness. Relaxation into not having anything to grab onto. And as that becomes more familiar to you, you have a greater sense of comfort with it, you know? And so then, like my friend Joan that I told you about a while ago, you can come to your death and say, I can hardly wait to die. What an adventure. Could even have a sense of joyful excitement about what is coming, even the not knowing what is coming. And so that's what our spiritual practice, if we are pursuing bodhicitta, will give us as we approach the moment of our passing. She says on page 45, while death can indeed be terrifying, it also presents an opportunity for enlightenment. This depends on what we cultivate during our lifetimes. In preparing for death, it's extremely helpful to cultivate familiarity with bodhicitta and the unconditional openness of our mind. In bodhicitta training, we learn to use whatever pain or fear we experience to open our hearts to other people's distress. In this way, our personal misery doesn't close us down. It becomes a stepping stone towards a bigger perspective. By training this way during life, dying will awaken compassion. Even the discomfort of physical pain, breathing difficulties, or fear will automatically awaken bodhicitta. The best possible preparation for dying is to recognize the nature of mind. In watching people die, I've observed that death can be a strong support for waking up. Everything is naturally falling apart. Our body's falling apart. Our way of perceiving reality is falling apart. Everything we've clung to is dissolving. The letting go that we cultivated during our life is happening naturally. This is what we've wanted, and now it's occurring on its own. If we spend our lives, at the bottom of the page, she says, searching for outside help through looking good, shopping therapy, addictions, and so on, we will look for something solid to hold on to when we die. When we find ourselves seeking help with panic-stricken eyes, we'll discover too late that this habitual response will not help. This is Shantideva's sobering message. We have to ask ourselves, in what do I seek refuge? Really important point. I've been doing a lot of work the past couple of years with a very difficult person. And I decided to do what I could to help this person who was sexually abused by one of our teachers because nobody else will help her. She's not a very pleasant person, and she's alienated so many people. And constantly blaming, 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 has held on to and nurtured this rage at the person who abused her. And we have been doing practices from the tradition, meditation, relaxation practices, to try to help her get to a place where she can make this transition into allowing her pain to become a bridge to other people's pain. So far, it hasn't worked very well, I'm sorry to say. And I can so easily see what children is talking about there because she's constantly reaching for something external to hang on to. She's constantly reaching out for someone to save her from her distress. One of the difficult things that's happened in her life is that she didn't really get married in good time by the Indian calendar. In India, you're supposed to be married probably by the time you're 18. In some places, they marry very much younger than that. She's in her mid 40s now. She's very picky, as you might imagine. She's constantly getting matrimonial contacts from people in India and elsewhere, actually. And she just finds some reason to dislike these people out of fear, mostly. And she has real trouble, works in education, but has real trouble allowing her pain to become a bridge to other people's suffering. And that's really the way out of this closed system that she's in. And I'm just racking my brain to try to figure out a way to help this work. So wish me well. It's definitely going to be a work in progress probably for some time. We go on in verse 47. Thus from this day forth I go for refuge to Buddhas, guardians of wandering beings, who labor for the good of all that lives, those mighty ones who scatter every fear. In the Dharma that resides within their hearts, that scatters all the terrors of samsara, and in the multitude of bodhisattvas, likewise I will perfectly take refuge. Gripped by dread, beside myself with terror, to Samantabhadra I will give myself. Samantabhadra, the granter of welfare to all, and to Manjushri, the melodious and gentle, the wisdom Buddha, I give myself entirely. To him whose loving deeds are steadfast, O my guardian of Avalokita, the Bodhisattva of compassion, I cry out from the depths of misery, protect me now, the sinner that I am. Now to the noble one Akshagarbha and to Kshitigarbha, from my heart I call, and all protectors great, compassionate, to them I go in search of refuge. And to Vajrapani, holder of the diamond, the very sight of whom will rout all dangers like the deadly host of Yama, to him indeed I fly for safety. Formerly, your words I have transgressed, but now I see these terrors all around. To you indeed I come for help, and pray you swiftly save me from this fear. Now, the way this has been translated, it says, save me, protect me. But that's not really the point. The point is, be with me, be by my side. Whisper, whisper in my ear to remind me to stay mindful, to keep my balance, to cultivate my upeksha. Walk with me through the valley of the shadow. In verse 43, Shantideva infers that when he didn't understand the workings of cause and effect, he continued strengthening negative propensities. Now, however, he comprehends that he is the one creating the causes of his future happiness or unhappiness. He is therefore inspired to follow the example of the master bodhisattvas mentioned here and to put their teachings into practice in this way. They will always be with him. Be with him, protecting him from fear. That is the issue. When you feel that presence in your heart, your fear goes way down. Just having someone be there with you in a difficult situation helps you to keep your balance. That's what we're asking for. We're asking for the Kalyana Mitra, the awareness of divine presence, the sense that God or Guru is looking over your shoulder. Might not be saying much ever, but you can feel him there, just behind you, just looking over your shoulder. If you have that sense of that presence, your mantra is really doing its work, and you'll never be alone. Even in the moment of death, you won't be alone. For if, alarmed by common ills, I act according to the doctor's words, what needs to speak of when I'm constantly brought low by lust and all the hundred other torments? And if by one of these alone the dwellers of in the world are all thrown down, and if no other remedy exists, no other healing elsewhere to be found, then words of the omniscient physician, uprooting every ill and suffering, the thought to turn on him deaf ears is raving folly, wretched and contemptible. Not just folly, raving folly. Absolutely crazy. You listen to the physician. You listen to the one who is there with you in your pain. And sometimes in the process of healing, that's all a physician can do is just be there. It's easy for physicians to forget this in the practice of their work. They put all their faith in medicine and surgery and devices and chemicals and whatever. But the thing that really heals people is the relationship they have with you. And I'm so grateful to have had the excruciating experience of working with all these clients with AIDS and HIV in the early days of the epidemic. Nothing worked. None of the medical stuff worked. In fact, what I saw an awful lot of the time was I saw physicians throwing technology at their fear in ways that actually put their clients in danger. This one guy who I've told a lot of stories about. It's a wonderful teacher to me. And he had had many, many opportunistic infections in his life. He'd had at least a dozen cases of pneumocystis pneumonia before I got to know him. I got to know him in the 80s. He had probably been sick with HIV since the early 1970s or the late 1960s, because clearly the illness was advanced in him. So he got another case of pneumocystis pneumonia, went into the hospital. His infection had become resistant to all the antibiotics, so they used some powerful chemotherapy drugs to put down the infection. And the chemo drugs made him really nauseated. But they did the trick. The pneumocystis pneumonia was conquered. They discontinued the chemo drugs, but the nausea hung on for months. For months, he was so nauseated he couldn't really eat food. Now, for someone with HIV, losing muscle mass because you're not eating is a very significant morbidity factor. It's really not a good thing. So I was talking this over with his physician one day, and his doc said, I think we're going to put in a feeding tube. I said, wait a minute here. You're going to put an interstate highway for pathogens into the body of an immunocompromised person? All we need to do is do some hypnosis with him, and we can figure out what the nausea is about, and chances are pretty good it'll just go away. But he insisted. He went ahead and did the feeding tube. I just, how could you not think about this, but he didn't. So I put the feeding tube in, and fortunately, no infection happened, thank God. They took the feeding tube out. He was still nauseated. They discharged him from the hospital. The day he was discharged, he came to see me in my office. So I said, okay, we're not in the hospital anymore. For legal reasons, I couldn't do the hypnosis with him when he was in the hospital because I'm not on the staff of the hospital. So I couldn't pursue it when I had the chance. So when he got to my office again, we sat down and did some very simple hypnotic exploration. And it turned out that the issue was he was sick to death of living and dying to other people's schedules and priorities. And that was what his nausea was about. Once he realized that, the nausea went away. He left my office. The next week he came in for therapy. He said, I left your office last week. I went home and had a pizza. How many people go home and eat a pizza after not having had any solid food for 3 months? Usually it would give people terrible digestive problems, but he was fine. He said the pizza was really delicious. So I saw physicians throwing technology at their fear with patients all the time. And I realized that even clinicians are just terrified about this stuff. The medical clinicians are terrified. The psychotherapeutic clinicians are terrified. I actually wrote a doctoral project about this whole problem. Um, and it wised me up to the fact that there's a difference between an illness, which is the body's response to a pathogen or to trauma, and a disease. Disease is a relationship to an illness. And just as I have a relationship with my client, they also have a relationship to their illness, and I have a relationship to the client's illness. And the healing, to the extent that healing is going to happen, it happens in the domain of the relationship, in the domain of the disease. Sometimes the healing thing is to let the body go, let it die. Somebody gets too far along with the disease process and decides that, the therapeutic measures that people want to take are just too horrible and disruptive, and I want to just let go. And people have to be free to be able to make that decision. And I absolutely understand why. They also need to be free to make the decision to live better. And there was one piece of research I came across in my doctoral project that was just stunning. It was actually in a linguistics journal. This guy who was a linguist, had analyzed the grammatical structure of autobiographical stories of people with AIDS and HIV. And he found two factorial groups statistically. There was one group that whenever they wrote about people with HIV, they always said them, even though they had the illness. And there was another group that was willing to say, I have HIV. Those people who were willing to have a relationship with the illness survived much longer and had a much easier course. And actually, the same is true of cancer patients. There are other modalities that have produced the same result. So, this whole idea of fighting a disease, not a good idea. If you get cancer, don't fight the cancer. Learn to love the cancer. Learn to have a relationship with it. Learn what it has to tell you about whatever it needs to say about your life. Doesn't guarantee that you'll live, but it does guarantee that you will have a better course, whatever may happen. And I think that's absolutely consistent with what Shantideva is telling us here. It's the quality of the relationship that makes a difference. And so we seek the protection of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, not to have them save us, not to have them be saviors. This whole business of the total forgiveness of everything you've ever done through Jesus' crucifixion, I have never been comfortable with that idea. Where human beings are concerned, that seems like a really bad idea to give them a blank check like that. You know, what's important is that you accept Jesus' company. Not that he save you, but that he just be with you. As Swami Rama is with us, walking with us through the valley of the shadow. And in that way, creating a relationship with our situation that allows us to think of whatever may come as a great adventure, as something that can be positive, regardless of which way it turns out, live or die. At that point, live or die becomes kind of immaterial. It's a beautiful moment when people have that sense of freedom and they can choose to go deeper. In verse 57, Shantideva says, if along a small and ordinary cliff I need to pick my way with special care, what need to speak of the immense crevasse that plunges down unnumbered fathoms deep? I've taken that walk. I've walked on the edge of some pretty impressive crevasses, and it's a little nerve-wracking. But I went through an experience in that changed my relationship to the experience from one of fear to one of gratitude for my fear. My fear is an alarm system that makes sure that my next step goes in the right place and I don't go over the edge. That's a good thing. Shantideva goes on. Uh, well, children interprets here. This immense crevasse refers to the sansaric mindset of continually seeking comfort and trying to avoid pain. Shantideva asks why, if we're so attentive, walking along a small and ordinary cliff, we aren't at least that heedful about the dangerous crevasse of samsara. For endless lifetimes, we've been falling into this crevasse. Let's finally get smart and not fall in anymore. There's that wonderful little poem by Portia Nelson. Um, I can't remember it offhand, but it talks about it's a metaphor for recovery from abuse and addiction. I was walking down the street the other day and I didn't see what was coming. There was a big hole and I fell in. And the next day I was walking down the street. I saw the big hole coming, but I fell in anyway. Another day I'm walking down the street. I see the hole coming and I take a step to go across it. And then finally the last line of the poem is, one day I took another street. It's exactly the sort of thing we're talking about here. It's great.
And they
Did
just walk on the other side of the street, or maybe put cones or something around the hole and
whatever,
report.
any of those things.
But the thing with the shadow of the valley, valley of the shadow of death. Just now was the first time I connected Jungian shadow with that. Like, oh yeah, that fits.
Interesting.
Especially what she was just talking about in that verse that you
Sure,
read.
sure. Verse 58. Today at least I shall not die. So rash to lull myself with words like these, because of course we can die at any moment. My disillusion and my hour of death will come upon me ineluctably. So why am I so unafraid? For what escape is there for me? My death will certainly come round. So how can I relax in careless ease? Of life's experience, all seasons past, what's left to me? What now remains? By clinging to what now is here no more? My teacher's precepts I have disobeyed. This span of life and all that it contains, my kith and kin are all to be abandoned. I must leave them, setting out alone. What grounds are there for telling friend from foe? She makes an interesting point in her interpretation of this. It's like the definition of friend and foe begin to change. Sometimes your enemy can be someone you learn a powerful lesson from. My father and I, as I was growing up, were kind of enemies. I think I think raising a gay kid made him really nervous and caused him to be more distant with me, and I reacted to that pretty painfully. So we set up a dynamic between us that resulted in a lot of fights about this and that, political things, gun control, whatnot. And because my father was actually the manufacturer's representative for Winchester Western in prime hunting country in the United States. So that was a big thing in our house. And I realize in retrospect, as my father and I got older and learned to be better with each other, by the end of his life, we were able to argue about things. Our points of view were very different, and we would argue about it. But when my mother called us to the dining room table, we'd drop it, just drop it, and just be with each other. It was a wonderful thing, and it taught me, as I often tell people, the value of a worthy opponent. I think a worthy opponent is a really valuable thing. And you learn a lot of lessons from your enemies. As Swami Veda used to say, your enemy has information about you that you are not willing to hear. Listen to your enemy. That's a point of view that we don't often take. But it's true. Your enemy has information about you that you don't want to hear. They're showing us a side of ourselves. Most of the time we hate and we really react to it, right? People hate, for example, President Trump because they see how self-absorbed and he is and what just a seeker of all these things that children is talking about and trying to hang on to stuff to deal with the pain. And I have been as deluded about that as anybody else. But from time to time, I have to shake myself loose and say, look at this person. This is someone who has never known a moment of joy, not 1 second of joy or 1 second of genuine love in his whole life. Nothing. What could I do for someone like that? And I faced that question actually. I used to work with quite a few people with narcissistic personalities in my therapy practice. Most of them were not very antisocial and exploitative. Many of them were very charming and had incredible skills and interesting sides to their personality. But inside there was this sense of an emptiness of love that somehow they had missed for one reason or another. And I see that when I look at him. So I make jokes about him too. But I don't ever forget the horrible suffering that he's in. Unbelievable.
What does
It's
it take?
it's so bad he doesn't even feel it. And I don't know what kind of mirror is going to be big enough to help him see it. And if he ever does, oh, I don't know what would happen. I don't know what would happen. Probably kill himself. It's really tough. It's a tough problem to figure out with someone like that a way to help them see their own suffering. Because the problem with the narcissistic personality is that they either overvalue themselves or undervalue themselves. There's no middle. There's no realistic sense of who they are as a person. None whatsoever. And they spend all their energy trying to stay in the upper part of that cycle. And it never works. It never works. So you have to do your best to try to extend a warm heart to them, knowing how little you're going to get back and knowing that you might just get punched in return. Think of the interaction between him and Bishop Mary Ann Edgar Buddy from the National Cathedral during the inaugural church service when she asked him to just remember that many people are afraid. Oh, that took a lot of courage for her to do that, man. I tell you, that was really something to watch. I have enormous respect for that woman, and I'm happy to say she's from Minneapolis. She used to be the rector of a church here in Minneapolis. Um, so I don't know exactly what would do the trick for him, David, but I think it would profit us all to try to find something. Verse 60, Shantideva says, I'm going to try to get to the end here. Of life's experience, all seasons past, what's left to me? What now remains? By clinging to what now is here no more, my teacher's precepts I have disobeyed. This span of life and all that it contains. Oh, we read that one. I must leave them, setting out alone. What grounds are there for telling friend from foe? And therefore, how can I make sure to rid myself of neurotic crime, only cause of sorrow? Rid myself of not evil, but ignorance, right? Because that's what causes us to constantly go back into attachment to pleasure and avoidance of pain. This should be my one concern, my only thought, both night and day. Therefore, all the neurotic crimes I have committed, blinded in the dark of ignorance, actions evil by their nature or the faults of broken vows, mindful of the suffering to come, I join my palms and ceaselessly prostrate, and all my evils I will now confess directly in the presence of the Buddhas. I pray you, guides and guardians of the world, to take me as I am, a sinful man, and all these actions, evil as they are, I promise I will never do again. Take me as I am. There's a beautiful hymn by that title, Just as I Am. That's what Jesus does. He says, I know the divinity in you. This is what I love about that film series, The Chosen, because this aspect of the human side of Jesus comes across so beautifully, and the human expression of his awareness of divinity comes across in his interactions with his disciples. And sometimes when he needs to persuade them, he'll pull out some piece of information he shouldn't be able to know to convince them that he knows something. He'll call them by a name that nobody else knows, or some such thing. But he says, I take you as you are. And that's what the Guru has said to all of us at the moment we sat down with them for that initiation. I take you as you are. And in my case, it was pretty pitiful, I have to say. I can't tell you the gratitude. Oh my God. I look back on what it meant in my life for me to have met Swami Veda. Holy mackerel. Who could ever have expected? So that divine companion takes us as we are, with all of the sanskars that we carry with us, the whole burden. They walk with us through the valley of the shadow. They walk with us in our embodied life and do their best to try to help us realize the importance of following the path of joy, path of mindful awareness, the path of tapas, or as they used to say in the early days of the Jesus movement, the way. That's what it used to be called, the way. Beautiful, the path. I was hoping to launch into chapter 3, but this just feels like a good resolution point. And Shantideva ends that chapter by saying, by making a sankalpa, a sankalpa that says, I promise I will never do again. The further we walk on that path of joyful, mindful awareness, the clearer and purer our buddhi becomes, and the greater becomes the power of that voice in us that can make that promise. Will we break that promise? Well, maybe. Yeah, I might. We can never know for sure. But what we can count on is the companionship of the Guru, the companionship of Buddha, the companionship of the Bodhisattvas. All these different ways we have of imagining and personifying, as it were, our relationship to our inner divinity and how it expresses itself in the still small voice in the cave of our heart. The little voice in your right ear from time to time that just says, okay, it's time. Yeah. Comments or questions before we conclude? Good. You know, it's interesting. I've given 4 or 5 talks this week to various groups. And each time I ask for questions, there's nothing. You know? And in my professor days, I would have thought, oh my God, what's wrong? Now I say, oh, good. People must be a little closer to meditation. And I think that's really closer to the truth. I hope so, anyway. We'll meet again in 2 weeks, I think. Take a week off for the Thanksgiving holiday and be back on, I think it is the 3rd of December. Just double check here on my trusty calendar that I absolutely must not forget to consult. Oh, it's December 1st. Huh. So I hope everybody has a lovely Thanksgiving holiday, a lovely time with people, and For those of you in other cultures and countries, be with your friends and be a friend, be a Kalyana Mitra. So let's just sit for 2 minutes and just feel the presence of that friend, of that spiritual companion walking with us in the valley of the shadow. Om Tat Sat. Brahmarpanamastu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Be well, everybody. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Stomaji.
Mm.